very special Dividend Cafe on this beautiful Monday from New York City. And for a lot of people, a beautiful day in the market as the Dow was up well over 1,000 points, NASDAQ up over 4%, the S&P up 3.25%. And there are four major stories that happened basically overnight into the morning. And so I want to spend our time talking about the market, which is largely related to one in particular of those stories. There could be overlap to some degree with maybe two of them, but it's one of those days where I just want to start off by saying how difficult it is to do the Dividend Cafe on a day like today, because I believe that any one of these four things could have warranted its own Dividend Cafe. And if there was not four stories, if you just had an up 1,000 point day in the Dow, that's a pretty big story. As far as a market commentary goes, having an extraordinary day like that in the market, that alone would warrant a little additional market commentary, obviously. And so when I say difficult, what I want you to understand is that, first of all, it is true. I love using weekend time doing a lot of reading and research. And a lot of times I have begun writing things for the Monday Dividend Cafe Saturday morning, throughout Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday. There's a lot more to kind of do as you get into the actual Monday itself. But this particular weekend, almost everything I would have done by Sunday night became somewhat obsolete. Now, I knew that there was a good chance of getting some news out of the China-US trade talks in Geneva, Switzerland, with Secretary Bahnsen and the Chinese vice premier. But the markets obviously did not expect, and I did not expect, this level of advancement, meaning the de-escalation is not just the water cooler handshake, things went very well, we're feeling good about a deal type of talk. That's pretty good. When that level of announcement began to come out on Sunday as futures were opening, the market was up 400 points. There was a market relief from that. But then when the secretary was speaking, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, New York time, 9 or 10 o'clock in Geneva. When they announced that there was a total suspension of the reciprocal tariffs that had been announced, then markets obviously rallied up to another level because markets were not expecting that. And I believe that markets are always responding not to good news or bad news, but unexpected good news and unexpected bad news. And this was unexpectedly good news. So you have this story, and I'm going to unpack more of it here in a moment. But then it's going on at the same time that the House is releasing its first draft of the tax bill, which they wouldn't do unless they were confident they can get it out of committee. It still is going to have to go through a full House vote. That has a lot of stuff in front of it, not to mention the Senate. But of course, different details are being leaked out, and I'm trying to tap sources of mine to hear more of what's going to be in there. And so I'm typing a bunch of commentary around what was known at the time, and then more gets known later, which makes some of my writing obsolete. That's all fine. But then like just less than 2 hours ago, then the House actually released the 389-page bill. So then you really figure, why release a Dividend Cafe full of, well, we think it might have this and we're hearing it's going to have that, when now we know what's sort of there. Now, I'm going to go through some of those highlights too, but none of those things are final bill stuff. It's real. If I'm talking about it now in a moment, it's in the House draft bill, but the House draft itself is still subject to plenty of changes, some changes that I very much expect will happen. And in addition to that, it has to go through the Senate. So there's a lot in front of us there. But I mentioned four things. The third I will get into quickly was that Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine are supposed to be meeting in person on Thursday for peace talks in the country of Turkey. President Trump has even said today he may join them for the meeting. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And of course, we don't really know that the Putin Zelensky talks themselves will happen. But you go from refusal to have a ceasefire, the U.S. looking like it's ready to abandon playing a role in negotiating some sort of peace talk, and then now these two sworn enemies potentially being in the same room together in a few days. So that's a massive geopolitical story of a war that's now over 3 years old, that is at a level of peace talk potentially we haven't yet seen. And then President Trump last week had said, I have an announcement coming. It's going to be the biggest announcement I've ever made. And then said yesterday, I'm about to send the biggest tweet or Truth Social post I've ever done. And then he did it. And then it was basically announcing that the federal government is going to be price fixing pharmaceutical costs and doing what is called a most favored nation policy, where they won't pay more than whatever the lowest price another nation might be paying. And at the time of the tweet going out, it didn't have details. How are they going to do it? What mechanism? What drugs are included, excluded? Is this just for reimbursements through Medicare? Does it include Medicaid? Are they trying to do it even more broad than Medicare, Medicaid? There are a lot of questions there, and that's the challenge when you're getting policy by social media, waiting for the actual thing. But then an executive order came this morning. So there's literally in that four major stories, and that's why it's a difficult Dividend Cafe to write. But as I mentioned, the Dow closed at a high of the day, up over 1,100 points, 1,161 points, which is 2.81%. S&P up 3.25, NASDAQ up 4.3. So major risk on day. The sector up the most, by the way, was consumer discretionary. I'm assuming you can figure out that's largely related to the vast exposure to Chinese tariffs. And the only negative sector was utilities. So it was 10 out of 11 sectors that were up on the day. Utilities down 68 basis points. The dollar was up 1.5% today. Not a big surprise on announce of the tariff changes. The 10-year bond yield was up, not a big surprise on expectations of better economic growth, closing at 4.47%, up 10 basis points on the day. So what we know on the China deal is 125% reciprocal tariffs are now off the table for 90 days, coming back down to 10%. And on an annualized basis, that additional tariff revenue, or tariff expense, excuse me, that is now off the table, annualized, is equal to over $300 billion of tariff cost that now will not happen in the economy. Of course, though, what we don't know is what will happen in 90 days. What we don't know is what the currency impact will be, because currency has not been discussed as part of the framework of their deal. Secretary Bahnsen is taking the lead in these talks. I consider that to be a very good thing for where this will go, and certainly markets consider it a good thing. I do not believe that this will be total smooth sailing from here, but I do believe the parts the markets need to know, that the Trump market put is not dead, that market discipline is alive and well. The Secretary Bessent is right now the grown up in the room. Markets are largely content to know that some of the tails are off from there, and that within the bell-shaped possibilities of outcomes, there are some better and some worse, but they're livable. But it's the tails at which the markets feel has largely been subsided. I will say that I think you're going to see an ordering bonanza in the next 90 days. If you thought, as an American importer or American manufacturer who imports unfinished goods in your process, and you thought you were about to pay 120, 140% more, and now you know there's a window in which that cost has come way, way, way down, and it might go back up, it might not, then it behooves you clearly to front run as much ordering as you can. So there could be a lot of pulled forward economic activity in Q2. That it's going to be something we're monitoring a great deal. I don't know how to weight the market movement today around these various catalysts, but I would say a significant portion is related to the surprise improvement in the U.S.-China situation. On the tax deal, let me try to do this as quickly as I can. It's hard to waste your time with a lot of these things, but I think you want to know where things stand. But I just want to be abundantly clear that it's all a moving target. It's going to change. They did come out and say the SALT cap deduction would go up to $30,000 from $10,000, but it would be capped. Nobody would be eligible above a $200,000 income or $400,000 for a married couple. So I do not think they're going to be able to get the votes from certain House moderate Republicans in New York and California that have already said 30,000 was insultingly low, but then throwing in the income limit, I believe, is going to require more negotiation. Speaker Johnson seems prepared for the fact that it's going to take more negotiation, but we shall see. That is what they've come out with in this first draft of the bill. The size of the tax cuts is down to 4 trillion. It had originally been 4.5 trillion. The size of spending cuts is down to 1.5 trillion. It had been 2 trillion. So about 500 billion on both fronts got taken out. Many of the pay-fors for the bill come from rolling back some of the tax benefits for electric cars, clean energy production. The idea of a higher marginal rate for top earners was not included, and there was some back and forth that President Trump went and he tweeted about it, how, oh, I'd be open to doing it, but they probably shouldn't do it. But in the end, it wasn't there. There's a higher tax on stock buybacks. There is a tax on investment income for endowments. It is a little complicated, the formula in there, but looking to tax private university endowments. There is language and no tax on tips. There is language and no tax on overtime, but it expires in 2028. So just 3 years. So we know how well those sunsetting provisions seem to go. It does not exempt taxation on Social Security income. As I've said all along, they wouldn't have room to do it. But it does include a $4,000 addition for seniors to the standard deduction. So it gives them an additional standard deduction of $4,000. And then it raises the estate tax exclusion to 15 million, so 30 million for married couples. And then for closely held businesses, it increases the deduction from 20% to 23%, the amount that you reduce taxable income on these closely helds for. I mentioned the executive order on pharma, most favored nation status. I don't know that they can get it through the courts. They had a provision they tried to do in 2020. The courts threw it out on procedural grounds, but then the Biden administration tried to run with it. This similar thing the Trump administration had done before that the courts threw out, and they weren't able to get it through courts, even trying to fix some of the procedural issues. And then you see today that, like this morning, so last night, the market was up 400 in futures when I went to bed. It was up 800 when I woke up. It was up 1,000 when I got back from my run. And in all three of those scenarios, pharma was down 2 to 3%. Then a bunch of the big pharma names today were up 5%, 7%, 4%, 6%, all big moves higher. So how did pharma reverse when the actual executive order came versus the announcement of the tweet? Well, there's a 30-day deadline for companies to negotiate lower prices before this governmental price fixing kicks in. So maybe markets expect that certain deals are going to keep this from happening. There's also the sense in which the market just may not believe it's actually going to happen, that either certain parts are going to require Congress is going to do it, the courts could punt it, kick it out. They've already done that before. We're working on additional research we'll make available when we get there, but that's where things are. So an announcement that was pretty surreal for how outrageous it is in terms of pharmaceutical price fixing from the federal government, and then a positive response in the pharmaceutical sector, which could signal any number of different things. I've already mentioned the Russia-Ukraine deal Thursday. in the interest of time, somebody in the Ask TBG asked me what my take on the carried interest issue was. And first, let me say they didn't make any changes to the so-called carried interest loophole in the House draft tax bill. And I tried to give a very nuanced answer at dividendcafe.com as to what I think about it, why I believe there is an argument for the carried interest loophole, why I believe there is definitely an argument for getting rid of it, but why the bigger issue to me is not about carried interest, but rather a flatter tax code in terms of the way capital and labor respectively tax. So I encourage you to read my answer. I'm going to save you the time here on the podcast and video from getting into it. But if you want to read it at dividendcafe.com or at the homepage in the Ask TBG section, it's there. Let's leave it there. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to have more to say in what's on David's mind tomorrow on Tuesday. It's drinking through a fire hose right now for me, and I feel guilty if I'm doing the same thing to you all. I'm trying to be as concise and succinct as I can, and yet still give you the information you want in summary form. But if all you want to know is markets are up big today, markets are up big today, and if all you want to know is why, it's because the U.S. and China have gone into at least a 90-day, suspension of their escalated trade hostilities, and a whole lot of other big things are going on around it. And hopefully, we're getting closer to a tax bill. And in the meantime, I hope you will reach out with questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and thank you for reading the Dividend Cafe on this very special Monday.